During the 2014 college football season, there was a lot of buzz about Deshaun Watson and other quarterbacks in college football. But one freshman that stood out to me initially was Brad Kaaya for the Hurricanes. I really liked what I saw, and I thought that this kid had big promise, big potential. And based off of what I saw his freshman year and projecting growth and improvement, I really thought we were looking at a guy that in another 2 or 3 years could potentially be a first round pick in the NFL draft, a guy that could potentially develop into a franchise quarterback. That's what I thought with Brad Kaaya in 2014. And I guess for some, the best way to equate it would be when they saw Christian Hackenberg as a freshman. The thought was in 2 years, he's going to be the number one overall pick in the draft. I don't know if I saw that much out of Brad Kaaya as a freshman, but I thought he was a first round pick whenever he would declare. But then the next 2 years of his Miami career happened, and there wasn't a lot of growth. There wasn't a lot of improvement. He kind of had plateaued. And when you pop in the film of him as a freshman, and you pop in the film of him as a junior, you really see the same guy. And that's concerning to me. So for a guy who I thought I would be talking about at this moment in time, potentially being a first round pick, talking about whether or not he's a franchise quarterback, I have significant questions about whether or not he's even a starting quarterback at all at the NFL level. When you look at his resume, I mean, he was a 3 year starter at Miami, led the Hurricanes to a bowl game each season, but he wasn't a franchise changer. He wasn't a program changer like a Deshaun Watson was. He didn't sit there and take that team and elevate them to championship contending status. Now, granted, that's not necessarily the fault of Kaaya because there are a lot of other factors at play. He had to undergo a coaching change during his career, and maybe that had some impact on his 2016 season. There's definitely potential for that. But you could sit there and say to a degree that he made Miami at least somewhat relevant again, and that was a bit of a victory. But I expected more and thought we would frankly get more out of him than we ultimately did. Now, when it came to his decision to declare for the draft, I really thought Brad Kaaya should have went back to school and taken his chances with the 2018 draft. I know I've talked about with guys like Trubisky and Kaiser that it made a lot of sense for them to declare. Same thing with Deshaun Watson because another year in school could potentially expose more flaws and based off of the national championship win, Deshaun Watson's stock, whatever it is, might never be higher. But I looked at Brad Kaaya and I said in a quarterback class that is already weak, he really didn't do much to distinguish himself at all. And he went from being a guy that a lot of mock drafts had being a first round pick to people questioning whether or not he's even going to be a day two pick. When you're a guy like this and you declare and you're a quarterback, you need to have a reason to do so. Your draft stock should be high. And to me, I don't understand the philosophy of declaring when your stock's probably at an all time low. So where I don't want to begrudge somebody for trying to make their money and getting that ball rolling, getting started as soon as possible, I felt that Brad Kaaya potentially left a lot of money on the table by not having the patience to go back to Miami and really hone his craft and work on his skills his senior year under Mike Richt. That's just my opinion. Now, in terms of the prospect, in terms of his biggest strengths, he's got decent height, about 6'4". Now, granted, he could use some bulk on his frame, that's for sure. But when you get into the NFL, you get into the strength and conditioning program, you would assume that he'd get a little bigger and a little stronger, even though I didn't see much growth in terms of his frame, in terms of his adding muscle or bulk at the college level. Maybe if anything else, he makes a baby or two. That naturally, and for the guys that are watching this that have made babies, you know what it's like. As soon as you make a baby, you instantly add 10 to 20 pounds just like that. You add some man weight. So maybe he makes a couple of babies, and that's where the man weight comes from. Who knows? You think I'm joking, but it's true. But you at least have the frame to work with. And if you add some muscle on there, you have a guy with the size to be a franchise quarterback at the NFL level and feel good about it. I really, really do love his throwing mechanics. That's one thing I want to make sure I talk about is so many things about his mechanics are really, really good. Mechanically, one of the best quarterbacks in this draft. He's got decent height already. His release point is pretty solid. He doesn't sit there as a 6'4" guy and have a release point of somebody like a Russell Wilson, let's say somebody that's 5'10" or somebody that's 6 foot. He has the release point or pretty close to it of a guy that is 6'4", which helps, which at the NFL level you would hope would help him to avoid getting a lot of passes batted down at the line of scrimmage, and that you wouldn't have to sit there and have him be creative and wait to find throwing alleys he could just throw over the top of the defensive line. I love the short, compact motion, so to speak. In terms of his upper body, I like the way he holds the ball. I like the consistent utilization of his footwork. It's more so the utilization of his lower body in his throwing motion. When you look mechanically, he's very sound, and it's one of the best mechanical quarterbacks in this draft. Like Deshaun Kaiser, Patrick Mahomes II, uh, they wish they had his mechanics. I also think he's pretty solid in terms of short area accuracy in the 5 to 10 yard range. Once you get past that, that becomes a challenge, and that's a real question mark for Kaaya. But in the short area, he's pretty good. His ball placement is solid. And, that's at least a decent foundation point to build off of for the NFL level. It's not like you're trying to totally remake him because he can't hit anybody 5 yards in front of him. But there's just so many question marks for me with him. And some of the biggest ones, pocket presence. To me, pocket presence is a huge thing. When you look at my grading scale in the description box, and each of them are on a scale of 0 to 10, um, while they each carry, in theory, an equal grading, when you talk about the way I grade, again, that is about just a general overview, but it doesn't necessarily take into account what certain teams may value. For me, when it comes to scouting quarterbacks, one of my most important traits I can see is pocket presence. The ability to stay cool and poised under pressure, the ability to know when to step up in the pocket, when to take a step back, when to move to the left, when to move to the right. And I really have some concerns about Brad Kaaya's natural feel and instincts within the pocket. I really do, because this is a guy, it seems like, that takes unnecessary sacks sometimes because he holds the ball too long, so his internal clock is not that great. Nor does he have the elite arm talent to be sitting there and holding the ball in the pocket too long because he can make big plays happen. Like at the NFL, you see with Aaron Rodgers and Big Ben. Sometimes they'll hold the ball too long in theory, but Aaron Rodgers can make incredible plays happen with his feet and his arm. And Big Ben has the feel and the ability, because of his size and because of his pocket presence, to be able to shed pass rushers and extend plays and keep plays going. And again, he's got elite arm talent. And Brad Kaaya doesn't have any of that. He doesn't have that ability to move like that. He doesn't have that ability to stay in the pocket and make people miss. And his feel for stepping up or stepping side to side, I think, is very lacking. And what really concerns me, similar to Brett Hundley last year, is when the pass rush is coming in his face, you're talking about a guy who has a tendency to drop his eyes and look at the rush instead of keeping his eyes up the field. And that really doesn't bode well as a pocket passer at the NFL level. Like at least a Brent Hundley, now in Green Bay, has a chance to learn behind Aaron Rodgers. He at least had natural athleticism and mobility going for him. Brad Kaaya does not. He's relatively immobile. Let's just put it that way. That's another one of his big question marks, is his mobility and running ability. I won't say he's a complete stiff, but he's not a guy that you're going to craft plays for to pick up yards with his feet. And he doesn't necessarily show a lot of natural feel and ability for being a scrambler going to the right and to the left. He showed it occasionally at Miami over 3 years, but not a lot. And ultimately, that's not going to be the name of his game. He is a pocket passer. So a pocket passer with questionable pocket presence who struggles to extend plays. That's not a good formula for success at the NFL level. And I question some of the intangibles. I question the intelligence of the decision to declare for the 2017 draft instead of going back to school, which, granted, he'd be in theory in a better quarterback class, but you never know what can happen. Guys could get hurt. Guys could have years that didn't live up to expectations, kind of like this quarterback class did with Deshaun Watson and Brad Kaaya. People started to discover some of their flaws, and they started to get serious questions because they start to pay more attention because it starts to matter. So maybe Kaaya goes back and does better things at Miami as a senior, and he doesn't start to look so bad compared to the 2018 class. So I question that decision making. I question and have concerns about work ethic in part because of the lack of improvement. Now, I'm not saying the guy doesn't practice hard or he doesn't work, but maybe he doesn't work well. Because again, I just didn't see a lot of progression over the course of his 3 years at Miami. And that's a concern I had about Christian Hackenberg coming out of Penn State. People could blame James Franklin in the system, but you look at Penn State and what they did this past college football season, and now, if anything, it serves as a validation and a vindication for James Franklin and what he was doing, and speaks more so to the flaws of Christian Hackenberg. He just didn't get any better. And Brad Kaaya, really, to me, just did not get any better. And trying to look at guys and their upside for the NFL, you want to see guys that worked at their craft, that honed their skills, that got better during their college career, because it gives you some hope that they could get better at the NFL level. And I just wonder if this is a guy that is content to kind of coast on what he perceives as his natural talent and not work on a lot of the shortcomings. And I kind of question the mentality. This was a guy heading into the 2016 season. Instead of talking about what Miami was going to do and what he was going to do to lead them, he was looking ahead to the 2017 NFL draft, thought it might be a good opportunity to declare because the quarterback class wasn't perceived as that strong. There are teams that are really going to question his focus on football, his mentality, his leadership. These are all significant concerns. In terms of an NFL comparison for him, uh, it took me a little bit, but I came up with Landry Jones, a guy with decent size but was kind of thin, a guy that lacked elite arm talent, a guy that you look at and you say had productive college career, but it doesn't necessarily translate to the NFL level. And Landry Jones was a fourth round pick by the Steelers in 2013. It just felt kind of right, that comparison. Landry Jones, relatively immobile, strong arm but not special, accuracy in the short area, but as you get further down the field, you have significant questions. You have questions about the ability to read defenses, all of that. And when I watched Brad Kaaya, I saw quite a bit of Landry Jones. So my final grade kind of reflects that. I gave him a 74.55, and you can look at the grading scale below to see where that helps him fall. That makes him a high fifth round pick. And that feels right. When you look at Brad Kaaya in an already weak quarterback class, there is a clear departure from guys like Mahomes and Kaiser and Trubisky and Deshaun Watson and Brad Kaaya. There is a clear departure. There is a significant gap there in terms of their readiness at the NFL level and their upside as NFL prospects. I could point to each of those other four guys and point to something and sit there and say, this is why a team would fall in love with him. Mahomes, I would look at the size and arm strength and athleticism combination and say there's something to work with. Deshaun Kaiser, similar type of thing. Mitch Trubisky, it could be his escapability and his accuracy and his ability to make big money throws. Deshaun Watson, it's his intangibles, leadership, ability to play big in big time games. Granted, that's the same type of things you could have said about a Tim Tebow back in the day. And if tangibles were the only thing that mattered, then Tim Tebow should be on the way to a Hall of Fame NFL career. But with that said, you can point to each of those other four guys, the biggest names in this quarterback class, and sit there and say there's something that really could potentially grab you if you so desired. If that was something that you were looking for, a team could be really interested because of this. And to me, I just don't see any of that there. He's got decent size and really smooth mechanics, but questions about accuracy, decision making, pocket presence, athleticism, which could lead to questions about durability, especially with the lack of bulk on his frame. He screams backup NFL quarterback. And when you think of backup NFL quarterbacks, he's being graded on the high side of that, and that's where he is. The reality of Brad Kaaya as a prospect right now is frankly that he is a fifth round talent. That if you took in the fourth round, I understand it, but you really shouldn't be in the business of taking backup quarterbacks who his upside is primarily as a backup quarterback at the NFL and take them anywhere before the fourth round. Taking them in day one or day two is ridiculous. Now, if you're sitting there and taking them because they have starter upside and they could sit behind an established starter for 1, 2, 3 years, like let's say the Patriots did or way back when the Green Bay Packers did with Aaron Rodgers, that makes sense. But taking a Brad Kaaya anywhere before the fourth round, I think, is ludicrous and crazy. Because based off of what I saw at Miami, I just don't see a guy, and I think a lot of you would agree, that looks like a starter at the NFL level.